In May 1859, Wilford Woodruff, his son, Wilford Jr., and his son-in-law, Robert Scholes, cut the logs and hauled them to his property in what was known as the Big Field south of Salt Lake City to build a farmhouse on his 20-acre farm. The two-room house was completed in 1860, and Wilford's daughter, Susan Scholes, moved in with her husband, Robert, and their new baby. After the Scholes moved to Ogden a few years later, a second floor with 3 bedrooms was added, and Wilford's wife, Emma, and their 4 children resided there. 3 additional children were added to their family over the next 9 years. Wilford stayed there often with his family and worked on his orchards, gardens, and farm. He made the farmhouse his primary residence from 1887 to 1891, when the Woodruffs completed construction on a larger home next door where they lived until his death in 1898. The farmhouse was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2002. Historians are intrigued by this landmark, one of the oldest log homes constructed, and perhaps the oldest log home that has survived on its original foundation in Utah. It has been continuously resided in since 1860, and the soundness of its construction is evident after 164 years. It is also significant in church history because of the revelations Wilford Woodruff received while living there and significant state and national events that occurred during the same time period. Some accounts recorded in Wilford Woodruff's journal related to the farmhouse. His journal entries on May 19th and 20th, 1859, include the difficult task of cutting logs to build the farmhouse. May 19th, 1859, I started early in the morning with Robert and Wilford for the top of the mountain to cut poles. A grizzly bear went up before us. He made a very large track in the snow and mud. We waded through snow and over it where it was 8 feet deep. Worked all day in about 3 feet of snow. Our boots soaked full of water and our feet became very cold. In the afternoon, we cut about 100 poles, mostly dry pine, which would average 35 feet long. We slid them down the mountain, through and over 3 or 4 feet of snow, about a quarter of a mile, and went down to our camp. At night, cold and wet, we made a good fire and dried ourselves, mostly. I shot 3 sage hens, one of which we cooked for supper, then turned into our wagon and slept for the night. May 20th, 1859. We arose this morning. I felt as though I had been foundered. I was very sore and stiff. Still, we went into the mountain and performed the same labor as yesterday. In the snow, we cut about another 100 dry pine poles and slid them down the mountain over the snow.
He was never afraid of hard work, and this was a big challenge. It was one of his biggest battles, but he'd still rather fight crickets than people anytime.
Wilford Woodruff was the second president of the Deseret Agricultural and Manufacturing Society, established in 1856 to promote the arts of domestic industry and to encourage the production of articles from the native elements in Utah Territory. The Society sponsored an annual exposition of agricultural products, handicrafts, household items, orchard fruits, and garden produce. This exposition was a predecessor of the Utah State Fair.
These are some of the pioneer foods. This is buckwheat pancakes, and these are gingerbread cookies. They really like gingerbread, and that is cornmeal. It's sometimes called Johnny cake. And this is actually a quince. Wilford had several quince trees because they were easy to graft into, and so he would do that when he wanted to try out some new kinds of apples. So he had 18 different kinds of apples growing here. He liked to experiment with a lot of things, strawberries, and he would exchange things with Brigham Young's garden sometimes. And then he would try to teach the people what they could raise here. They had to learn gardening all over again out here and what would grow in the middle of a barren desert.
On his farm, Wilford planted corn, wheat, oats, potatoes, sugar cane, Hungarian grass for hay, and fruit trees and bushes, including peaches, plums, apples, apricots, currants, and almonds. He built a mill to crush the sugar cane that he and his neighbors grew in order to make molasses. He experimented with many seeds and sprouts to determine what plants would flourish in the Salt Lake Valley, and even traded gardening expertise with William Hooker, the director of the Royal Botanical Gardens during the reign of Queen Victoria. He was awarded many accolades at the fair over the years for his farm and his crops, from Best Fenced and Cultivated Farm and Best Acre of Sugarcane to Best Sugar Beets, Best Cantaloupes, and Best Apples.
One time, 2 of his sacks of wheat disappeared from the house here, and the next Sunday he announced in church that whoever took the wheat, if they needed it because they were hungry, they're welcome to it, but please return the sacks. And the sacks were returned the next day. He had a pond out here in the back here about where the duplex is. He raised carp, and that was a big delicacy back there. A lot of the general authorities had carp ponds.
Emma was Wilford Woodruff's only wife who lived in the farmhouse and the villa. Their son Asel built the house next door to the south of the villa in 1907, and their daughter Blanche built a home to the north of the farmhouse. All 4 homes still stand today.
But she put up with the farmhouse here. She really didn't love it, but it was her place. But then her reward was getting the villa.
September of 1873, Wilford, at the point of death, healed through a priesthood blessing in the farmhouse. September 25, 1873, went to bed, and I very soon felt as though I was struck with death, that I could not live an hour. All my blood, spirit, and life seemed to be leaving my limbs and closing around my heart and vitals, and I felt as though I would soon die. I sent for my neighbor, Brother William Wagstaff, to come and lay hands upon me. When I felt as though I was about to give up the ghost, he laid hands upon me, and I was liberated instantaneously. On December 16, 1887, the farmhouse was dedicated by George Q. Cannon, one of Wilford Woodruff's counselors in the first presidency. December 16, 1887, Brother Cannon prayed with us and dedicated a house unto God. During the family's Christmas Eve celebration in 1888, a fire started. The charred wood is still visible in the farmhouse as a reminder of the family's gratitude that no life-threatening injuries occurred and the home was preserved.
Their Christmas tree caught on fire, and Asel had to put it out with his hands, and he got burned hands, but survived. They still went on with Christmas and just put out that fire.
Wilford Woodruff worked and lived at the farmhouse with his family members between 1860 and 1898, a significant time in church history and the history of the state of Utah. The farmhouse preserves sacred ground where revelations were received by Wilford Woodruff that saved the temples from government confiscation and the church from disintegration. Understanding its history can build faith and increase understanding of the core 19th century events related to the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ and the purpose of temples. This home also represents the political, economic, community, and national development over the course of 50 years of significant Utah history. In addition, it serves as a physical location for Woodruff artifacts that have survived more than 200 years and helps explain the reasons the saints were willing to sacrifice everything to keep their covenants. The records Wilford Woodruff wrote here contain sacred history. The sealing and exaltation of families is why priesthood keys and ordinances were restored through Joseph Smith in the 1830s and 1840s. This site is where revelations were received by Wilford Woodruff in the 1890s to save the temples where those priesthood ordinances could be administered and where families could be united for eternity within the kingdom of God.